To discuss Hadley Heath Manning, Independent Women's Foreign Policy Director. Ford O'Connell's with the Civic Forum PAC Chairman, Kayleigh McEnany, RNC spokeswoman, and Jillian Melcher, Wall Street Journal editorial page writer. I've got to give you the honors, Kayleigh.
Yes.
A promise made, a promise kept. This is a big one.
This is a huge one. It comes, of course, on the heels of the South Korea trade deal, the promise from the EU that we will get to zero on tariffs, and then to have this part of the deal with Mexico, one of our biggest trading partners. It's extraordinary, and particularly the pace at which it was done. This was over a year period, and this was 7 trade talks with thousands of people involved, and we were able to get this done in what is a better deal for the American worker.
I think it's a better deal for all workers. You know, you got the $16 threshold for up to 45% of the workers. I think that helps Mexican workers. Listen, the notion of fairer deals, I don't see why that rankled so many people, Jillian, but obviously it did. And then to Kayleigh's point, not only did people put this off until after the midterms, but with the election of a socialist in Mexico, some thought that that would really gum up the works, but it hasn't.
Well, I mean, there's been a rush to put this in place for sure. And I do think that this deal is better than no NAFTA, no trade relationship with Mexico whatsoever. There are some things that I find a little bit concerning. One of the main ones is the lack of investor protections for U.S. companies working in Mexico. This is actually weaker than it would have been
so
before.
You know those details already?
Yeah, the idea would be that it would likely dissuade U.S. investment in Mexico, keep it at home. But I think that's not a great idea.
So you don't like the idea of more investments in America? You want American companies to invest in Mexico? Is that what you're saying?
I think that part of protecting Americans is protecting Americans who invest abroad. I want American companies to succeed, prosper. I want the people who invest in them to be able to have a fair shot. And I think that, they're not going to expropriate property. They may try to put an unfair deal forward for an American investor through the regulation. NAFTA was good about protecting that. I'm concerned that it's not going to be as strong under the New Deal.
Hadley Heath Manning, are you concerned that somehow this will send I mean, listen, I think we want to see more investment in this country, we keep hearing that our neighbors, Canada and Mexico, we should allow them to produce all of our steel and aluminum because that we can always count on them. So I'm not sure that there's any bad elements to this, and certainly it's moving quicker than a lot of people thought it would.
Right. It's a deal. But as always, these things are much more complicated than deal or no deal. Right. We want a good deal. We don't just want any deal. And as Jillian mentioned, the devil can be in the details. It's not just about investment abroad, but all of these, provisions within our trade deals. We have to pay attention to not just how American workers can be protected, but what are the effects going to be on consumers? And of course, any restrictions on free trade and of course, tariffs add to the prices that we pay as consumers. So I think it's a good thing that we're moving forward, making progress in this deal. I think ultimately bringing Canada in, this will be a good thing for Americans in the end. But we do want to see as few restrictions on free trade as possible, especially with these very close neighbors, Mexico and Canada.
Ford is interesting because, of course, I think the media has pounced on this thing, and they've showed a few farmers and a few people here and there. Farm revenue peaked in 2012 at $124 billion. The year before President Trump became president, it was $60 billion. I didn't hear one story about the American farmer, not one. And I got to tell you something. The idea of not protecting Americans, I think Americans are at the point where they're telling the political class, we will pay a little bit more if we can get some of those 7 million jobs back.
Well, look, I think you're absolutely right. I think what the media doesn't understand is every time they were hounding Trump, they were saying, let's stay with the status quo. And if you live in middle America and you're a farmer or you're in manufacturing, the status quo just cannot hold. And look, I'm not sure that everything is in this agreement to our liking, but it's definitely a big win for the American worker. Look, since this thing was enforced in 1994, it is simply outdated. And it's not just, regional content rules and rules of origin, which are going to help particularly the automobile worker. This thing had to be updated from intellectual property to include the digital economy. Look, this is a win-win. Hopefully we can force Canada to the table. But what I found very interesting here, Charles, was that Mexico was willing to go to a bilateral deal if something could not be done with Canada.
I am shocked at Canada. Nieto was very complimentary on that conference call. He applauded President Trump for pushing this. The acrimony that was there in previous encounters was completely gone. And it makes me hopeful that maybe they can shed all of that stuff, the personal stuff, as we try to couple a deal with Canada.
No doubt. This president has the ability to advance our relationships. And think about the EU. We were told, it's done. We are never going to have another great deal with the EU because of our raising the steel and aluminum tariffs. Well, look what happened. A few weeks later, you have the commissioner of the EU standing by the president saying we are going to get to zero. That is our vow. This is a great deal. Remedies, it basically rectifies the problems with agricultural disparities between the two countries, textile. It makes a vow that 75% of auto content will come from either the U.S. or Mexico, and 45% of that content must be produced by labor that makes $16 an hour or more. This is a win for the blue-collar worker, and our party is officially the party of blue-collar workers after this deal and with these president's actions.
Do you think it'll resonate well with the voters who voted for President Trump? Do you think they'll be happy with this?
I think it's going to help some of them. I'm also concerned, though, with the broader trade talk about who it's hurting. I do think that there is sometimes a forgotten man in these trade negotiations. Today I was looking at.
Do you think President Trump did this because of the forgotten man? That the 7 million manufacturing jobs lost since Canada entered the World Trade Organization and all of the. I just mentioned the farm. When I mentioned the farm revenue, no one could explain to me how farm revenue could go down 50% before Trump comes into office, and all of a sudden everyone cares about the farmer.
I think that any time that government intervenes in the free exchange in the marketplace, that they're going to be forgotten.
But they're always going to intervene.
Sure, but I do think they're going to be forgotten men. And I've certainly heard, from companies that have steel-dependent products where that's the main input. We're hearing this from companies that are fabric manufacturers that are buying that as an input, keeping American jobs here. We're hearing this from cherry farmers that are now facing more than 50% tariffs.
Although Ford,
I think there are some forgotten men.
I will say that these forgotten men and women, I bet you right now, mark me down, that they're going to overwhelmingly vote for President Trump in 2020 because they know he went to bat for them. They feel like he won. They're going to cheer this. And they'll probably cheer the other deals. I'm just hoping we can get Canada done and we can get China done because ultimately, honestly, I think they're win-win for all of the countries involved if we make them smarter and fairer.
Well, look, here's what I don't understand, particularly for the Trump detractors and the media. Why is it a sin to help the American worker? And why is it a sin to put Americans above other countries? I think that's what we have to remember here. Yes, it is always great in terms of economics, guns and butter, if we can actually maximize the utility of everyone involved in trading. But at the end of the day, President Trump is right to focus on the benefit of the American worker. And sometimes the haters just have to understand Trump has a mysterious way about going about things, but he delivers results. And hopefully we can deliver more. And hopefully, because of North America, we can bring Canada into the fold. And I think that Mexico's taken a broad step here to actually make Canada come to the table.
Hadley, what do you think Canada would be willing to accept? Obviously, the hardball tactics, I think, will probably subside. There's a sense of urgency here. This Chapter 19, for instance, the trade dispute, it really seems to favor Canada and Mexico a lot more than America. Canada has dug in their heels, but could they give up on that?
Ultimately, the good news for President Trump and for all Americans is that we are the 800-pound gorilla in the world economy. Everyone wants to do business with us at the end of the day. And so President Trump is right to be aggressive in some of these trade negotiations and to position himself as the defender of the American worker. But I'll agree with Jillian. We ought to protect our right as Americans to freely exchange in the world economy. And I hope that President Trump will take that into consideration.
Well, but so you think he hasn't so far? You think all this effort that he's made, he's not taking that into consideration?
No, I think he is. I think he will. I think you have to balance the concerns about the American worker and our industries at home domestically, as well as our right as Americans to participate in the economy as consumers. We don't want to see the prices on the goods that we consume increase because of any restrictions on free trade. And so balancing those concerns is important.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think we're talking about, this isn't a choice between the American worker and the foreign worker. I think it is more a choice between which American worker benefits and which American worker is hurt. Yeah. And I think that's something
we know we've
really
hemorrhaged a million jobs since.
I will respectfully disagree 1,000%. 400,000 new manufacturing jobs since President Trump came on board. Every expert that echoes this whole, hey, you know what, we're worried about the consumer. They're not. They're worried about corporate America's bottom line. They're worried about the globalists and Wall Street making big money. I don't believe that, because if you really were concerned, I think the average American watching this show would pay a little bit more if their neighbor who lost their job 5 years ago got it back. That's what I think. And I talk to a lot of individuals, some companies, but more individuals. I think I'm